any questions to start with? I hope you're in the right room. This is computer audio from beginning settings to somewhat advanced settings. If you're in the right place, we're glad you're here. Let's start with Steve.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. So I want to give you just a brief overview of what I'm going to cover today. So everybody's expectations in that. Today's seminar that I'm going to focus on is really the basis of getting your computer set up, optimizing iTunes, looking at add-ons to iTunes, optimizing your library storage, optimizing your computer peripherals so that you can get the most sound, the most performance out of computer audio. So just so I can gauge the audience, how many people here are already doing computer audio? Okay, fantastic. How many people here are Mac users? And how many are PC users? We're agnostic in here. Don't be a hater. Okay, who's bi and curious? Who uses Windows and Mac? I like open-minded people. You don't find many bi-curious people in Orange County. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through iTunes on a Mac computer. I'm going to show you all the different peripherals, all the little setup, what I call gadgets in it. I don't know if you've ever tried to find an owner's manual from iTunes. No, but we have everything online. We already have an owner's manual online. So if you notice, Apple doesn't provide an owner's manual for iTunes. They don't tell you what all the features do when you turn them on and off. So we've been screwing around with it now, going on eight years or so, trying to figure out how to get good performance out of iTunes. And I'm going to take you through all these things. Some of it may seem rudimentary, things maybe you've already seen, but you may find some kernels of wisdom in here that you can take home. Then what I want to do is for our Windows friends, I want to take you over to Windows. I'm going to reboot my computer and we'll look at J-River. Is anybody here running J-River?
J-River on a Mac.
Okay, you're very enthusiastic. So we do have J-River on a Mac too, but I'm going to take you over to PC because the Mac side of J-River is not completely built out yet. There's a lot of features over on the Windows side that I want to show you. There's really interesting things you can do with J-River. For instance, you can play multiple locally connected DACs off the J-River player. That means I could have more than one USB DAC connected to the computer, and J-River can play a different song to a different device at a different sample rate at the exact same time. And that's something we can't do in iTunes. The other thing we can do with J-River is we can use it as our set-top television box. We could use a USB to cable converter, and we can use this as our TV tuner if we like to do that.
And it finds album art.
And we can. You need to not drink so much coffee. And the other thing that's nice is you can use. I'm really big into concert DVDs. I grew up in an era when MTV was really important to us. 10, 11, 12 years old, MTV came online. My generation's really excited about not just listening to music, but watching music. And so one of the things I do love about J-River is I can copy all of my concert DVDs, all my concert Blu-rays into my computer, and I can use J-River to stream those all over my home. So I'm going to cover just the basics here. I'm not going to get into arguments over file formats. I don't care. I'm not going to get into arguments over who builds a better computer or who has a better operating system. Really all I want to do is I want to be as agnostic as possible, and I want to give you as much information that I think is valuable just to getting started and getting going. So I'm going to start with iTunes. So the other thing here is I just had a baby 3 months ago. Thank you. She's even cuter now, and if you want, I have an hour-and-a-half session up in my room later with baby pictures. So the first thing I want to talk about is your computer. Let's focus on the computer. Let's start thinking about our computers as an audio component. Okay, the CD drive, for all intents and purposes, is this sort of a thing of the past. Let's talk about how we're going to get the most performance out of our computer. So if you've ever been in a recording studio, I think you've been in one or two. When you go to recording studios, one of the things you notice when an engineer lets you look under the hood of the computer is the amount of RAM that recording engineers will have on their computers. computers. An engineer named Gus Skinnis, he was one of the early engineers in the SACD project, worked for Sony. He told me RAM is a lot like money. You can never have enough of it. So, you know, when you go into these studios, you'll see, and this gets pretty intense, you'll see guys with 64 gig, 128 gig of RAM. You've seen higher possibly?
Yeah. They always max out the RAM.
I don't know why more RAM makes your computer sound better. I'm not a computer scientist or an engineer, but I've noticed over the years, over the last 8 years, I've had 4 computers, and with the different computers, every time I increased the amount of RAM, the performance got better.
How much?
The system sounded more relaxed. The system was more dynamic. You want to go in even increments. So typically you have 2 cards in a laptop. So you want to make sure the cards are of the same size. So sometimes it gets a little squirrely. You'll see some older Apple computers that can have, they claim you can use 6 gigs of memory. So that would mean that you would need a 2 gig stick and a 4 gig stick. But the computers don't really operate that way. And what happens is you wind up really only optimizing 4 gig because they can only work symmetrically. What I found is 8 gigabyte of RAM seems to be the minimum mandatory that you want in your computer. And now you're getting into computers that can run at 16 gig on laptops. And if you want, and it's cheap. It's cheap. Now, the other thing I want to caution you with about RAM is not all RAM is created the same. So just as an anecdotal story, I had bought 8 gig of Kensington memory because it was so cheap. And I put it in my computer, and it didn't sound any better than the 4 gig that my Apple computer came with. So I talked to a friend who works in computers and audio, and he said, oh, you can't buy the Kensington stuff. The Kensington RAM has, it's the stuff on the outer wafer. And if Kensington doesn't buy it, it goes in the landfill. The inner wafer is where the really good RAM is. And those are, if you go to a website called macsales.com, they sell the A-grade RAM there. And there's a demonstrable difference in the performance between the low-grade RAM and the high-grade RAM. And again, I don't know why. I don't know why. So currently I'm running 16 gig in my computer, and it sounds absolutely fantastic. The other thing that makes a difference is the operating systems. 64-bit operating systems tend to sound better than 32-bit operating systems. So if you're a Windows user and you have a 32-bit operating system, you unfortunately have to go out and you have to buy the 64-bit operating system. If you're a Mac user, all you have to do is turn off your computer, do a complete shutdown, and when you restart your computer, hold down the numbers 6 and 4, and wait until the computer starts, and now you're in 64-bit operating mode.
You have to do that every time you start?
No, you don't. It's a one-time set. And then if for whatever reason, maybe you have a legacy printer that doesn't work on a 64-bit operating system, you can do the reverse. So you can shut off the computer, reboot with 3 and 2, you're in a 32-bit operating system, and then when you're done printing, you can shut it down and restart it.
Actually, when you buy most Microsoft operating systems, depending on which package you buy, it comes with 32 or 64.
Yeah, that's really nice when they do offer that. Yeah, but if you don't have 64-bit on Windows, go out and buy that. It'll make a nice difference in the performance of your system. Now, the other thing that we found that makes a really startling difference is the hard drive that your operating system and your applications sit on. So you want to pay attention to a couple things. I think it's important to have a solid-state hard drive inside of your computer. And this is to run our operating systems, and this is to run the applications. So things like iTunes, Amara, Pure Music, JRiver, those are the applications. The computer sounds better when all of those the operating system and the applications are running off of a solid-state drive. Now, the solid-state drives aren't all created equal to either. You can go online, you can look at them. They'll have a different cache size, and they have different read and write speeds. And what we found is the solid-state drives with the largest cache, with the fastest read and the fastest write times, they tend to sound better. So again, let's think of this as a CD player. We want to maximize all the performance parameters of the computer. So just to recap, get as much symmetrical RAM as you can get, run a 64-bit operating systems, use a solid-state hard drive for your operating system and for all of your applications. Okay? Now let's talk about where we're going to store our media. It's interesting, if you store your media externally, like I have right here, if you store your media externally on a drive other than the internal drive, you get a noticeable improvement in performance. It's a lot to ask the computer, the bus, to be running the operating system, running the applications, and searching after the music and then porting the music at the same time all on one bus. If you can separate functions to different buses, you get better sound. So I'm going to tell you right now, this is a do as I say, not as I do. I just got a new computer a couple weeks ago, and I haven't had a chance to buy the Thunderbolt to FireWire adapter for my hard drive. Who here is using a USB DAC? Anybody using a USB DAC? Okay. If you're using a USB DAC, do not plug your external hard drive in on the USB bus as well. You will get conflict. The bus is not very sophisticated. Your DAC is speaking a language, either asynchronous USB or adaptive USB, and your hard drive is speaking both protocol. Asking the bus to work with both devices at the same time is like asking any of you to speak Portuguese and English at the same time. It's not going to be pretty. So if you can, connect your external hard drive to a different bus. Now, you could do some things like, anybody here have a computer with a PCI card slot in it still? You can buy a PCI to USB bus, and that creates a whole separate bus. So if your DAC is on the computer's USB bus and the hard drive is on that PCI bus, they're not conflicting. But what I tend to do at home is I use a FireWire port or a Thunderbolt port for my external music hard drive, and that way I don't have any conflict for the DAC, and I also don't have any conflict between where my music is in the operating systems. So I'm trying to separate as many functions from one another as possible, and I find that you get much better performance by doing that. Okay? So those are sort of the fundamentals, the basics for just getting your computer optimized. And I'll hit pause real quick, and I'll try and answer any questions about the computer hardware side of things if anybody has any.
What hard drive is that you're storing it on?
This is a spinning disk, an HDD drive. It's a 500 gig drive. I would love to have solid state for my music collection at home, but it's still cost prohibitive. I've got close to 4 terabytes worth of music, so I'd be looking at about $3,000–4,000 in hard drive space. So at home, I'm using a spinning HDD drive for now.
What about a hybrid?
Can I use a network one?
I'll get to networks. Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't played with hybrids, but I should start looking into that. When I did look for my hard drive, again, I looked for a hard drive with the largest cache, the fastest read-write speeds, and I found that aided in performance. I tend to be very loyal as a customer, and I don't work for the company. I'm going to keep promoting them. MacSales.com. They sell phenomenal hard drives. They sell great upgrades specifically for Apple computers. If you are a Windows user, you can buy hard drives there and reformat them. But they tend to focus on the higher performance products. Typically, when you buy a hard drive from them, it's not the least expensive hard drive, but it tends to be the highest performance hard drive in terms of RPM, read speeds, write speeds, size of the cache, and then the warranty is really, really good.
Most computers have multiple USB ports. You know if those are on separate buses? Like often they have a 2.0 and a 3.0.
Sometimes they are. Sometimes they are. And if they are on different buses, then you can get away with keeping the hard drive on one bus, and you can get away with keeping the DAC on another bus. But you know, in the Apple computer, you can go into the tree and you can look at the bus and you can see it appears as if each port is a separate bus, but they're actually all tied together inside of this computer. So it could be somewhat not deceptive, but you could misread the information. So for me, for peace of mind, what I do is I like to just keep it on a FireWire bus. Now, somebody had asked a question about network, a NAS. So does everybody here know what a network attached server is? Okay, great. If you don't know what a network attached server is, it's basically a simple computer device. It's a networking computer device that can send and receive files. It's a very, very simple device. It doesn't have a computer screen. It doesn't have a computer screen. It doesn't have a keyboard. It doesn't have a mouse. It's just a very simple device. And what you do is you plug it into the network, and you can point your iTunes library at that device, and you can store your music there. So if you didn't want to have your music collection stored locally, you can have it as far away as 300 feet. So they're very nice to use. That's an excellent way to store music. And if you have multiple computers in the house, if you've got kids, spouses who also have music collections, you can set up the NAS where each person can have their own music collection on that device. You can set up security on that as well, where maybe your kids don't want to share their music with you or vice versa. The other thing you can do with some of these network attached servers is you can create a virtual private network. If you had a second home and you wanted to log on to your NAS and you wanted to stream music from your house where you primarily live to your vacation home, you could do that with a NAS as well. So you could have 2 computers in 2 different locations depending on Ethernet speeds, the internet speeds between home A and home B.
Does that affect the quality when you're really good local drive? If you use a NAS drive, what does that do to the quality?
They can be excellent. There's one company. There's 2 companies in particular, Synology and QNAP, make really high-grade network-attached servers. They run on Intel processors. They're configurable, so they actually come empty shells. So you can buy the hard drives that you want to put in there. You can put in solid-state drives. You can put in HDD drives. But you can pick the quality of the drives. And then when you're getting into this, the other thing that plays into it is the router. There's 10-100 gigabit speed routers now. Gigabit speed sounds significantly better than a 10-100 router. And if you're using switches in the house, the gigabit switches sound significantly better as well. So again, there's this correlation between speed of devices and perceptive performance. So
iTunes can run on Windows too. What do you think of that combination?
I don't like it. It doesn't sound good at all. There's not a lot you can do to improve it. So if you're are you a Windows user?
I am a Windows user. I use JRUC and I used to use iTunes on Windows, but I was just wondering, what you thought of that combo. It didn't seem that big of a...
It's a square in a round hole.
I'm not sure why, but...
Yeah, it's a square in a round hole. Any other questions before I move on to iTunes and getting iTunes set up?
So literally, you can plug an NAS hard drive into Ethernet connection on your router, and you're done.
Yeah, and then you would go into your computer and you would point iTunes at that device. You may have to install a driver on your computer to talk to the NAS, and typically they come with a disk, or they have a way to connect it to the internet and download the drivers that you need.
I used to have my 1.4 terabyte music on NAS, and then I moved it to a Thunderbolt drive, and now I can re-index the database in 2 hours versus 2 days.
Yeah.
So the NAS is much slower, number one.
Extremely
number two,
slow.
If you're going to keep your music on the NAS drive, it's very important to use memory play to not get caught up in the delay, or you may have gaps in your music.
Yeah, that's he's jumped ahead a chapter, and I'm glad you brought that up. We're going to talk about memory play, and these are add-ons for iTunes. So let's go to iTunes. We'll unfortunately have to stop looking at my adorable baby. Okay, so here's all my music. In iTunes, we have our preference setting. And the first thing we want to do is we want to look at how we're going to import our music. Okay, so what I typically like to do is I like to use the AIFF encoder. There's two bit for bit, size for size encoders built into iTunes. There's a wave encoder and there's an AIFF encoder. And both of those encoders will copy a CD at the true data rate at 1411 kilobytes per second. You could also use Apple lossless if space is a constraint. We're getting into an era now where a terabyte is $80. So it's getting to a point where we don't need to save space. Anecdotally, and I don't want to get into a debate about it, but anecdotally I've noticed that FLAC doesn't sound as good as WAVE and Apple lossless doesn't sound as good as AIFF. And this is a hunch. Again, I'm not an engineer. My hunch is that it's an additional process to take the file and unfold it and restore it to its full size. It requires a little bit of resource, and that has some sort of sonic footprint on the music. You can always try it yourself at home. You could record one song in Apple lossless and one song in AIFF. If you hear a difference, choose the one you prefer. But for me, peace of mind, I like the file to be in its true form, and I find that it sounds just a hair better. So I encode everything in AIFF. All of my files are in AIFF. Now the reason why I don't use WAVE is WAVE has a difficult time with the metadata when I make a backup of my hard drive. So I learned this the hard way. I'm sure there's other people in here that might have learned this the hard way too. But I copy about 100 disks, and then I said, oh, I'm going to do my time machine now and back it all up. So then I saw 1,100 songs. just song 1 through 1100 on the backup drive. None of the metadata came over with WAVE. So the correlation between what songs went with what album, the names of the albums, the names of the song, the artist, none of that stuff can move generationally when you back up your hard drive. Now in AIFF, that's not a problem. When you set your encoder to AIFF or Apple Lossless or MP3 or AAC, they have the hooks, the metadata hooks built in. So everything follows from generation to generation to generation as you back everything up. So my suggestion is hard drives are cheap, use AIFF, and you'll be good to go. Now the other thing here is I have the error correction selected. I'll read a lot of debates on these websites like Audio Asylum and Computer Audiophile and things like that. And people will talk about iTunes can't copy the disc properly. Or, you know, you have to buy XYZ program to get a bit perfect copy of your CD. iTunes is 100% bit perfect 100% of the time as long as you have error correction selected. You will get an absolutely perfect copy of the CD. So the way that this, there's two scenarios here. If this is not selected, if error correction is turned off and I put a disc in and I copy the disc, if the disk drive gets to a point where there's a read error, where it can't read the disk, it just skips over and keeps reading, and it skips over the next. Those skips, then, the data that's missing is filled in through interpolation. Interpolation is a really fancy word for guessing. So you wind up with not a bit perfect copy of the disk. Just by turning this on, if I get to an error, it will read that error until it's read the error exactly the same way twice. Then it knows that it's got an exact copy. And then it moves on to the next error, and it won't move on until it reads the error the exact same way twice again. And you get a bit perfect copy. And so just anecdotally, I had a Steely Dan disc, that a CD, and I liked the music, and when I made the first copy of it with this off, it sounded terrible. It was just awful sounding. And then I turned the error correction back on. These are all, I learned the hard way. This is back in 2006 or 2007. I wound up making another copy of all the music, and this is the one particular album that really stuck out. It took like 8 or 9 minutes to copy this one particular Steely Dan disc, where with the error correction off, it copied in 2 minutes. There were so many error reads on that disc. Well, when I went back and listened to that disc, it was like I went from MP3 to 2496. It was such a huge difference. It's amazing the difference between a bit perfect and a not bit perfect copy.
There are ripping services that have databases of the most popular music compared to
Yeah.
whether any of those claims are true.
I don't know whether or not they're true or not, but one of my colleagues, a guy named Gordon Rankin, who helped, I work at AudioQuest, we have the Dragonfly. Let me answer this question real quick. Before Gordon designed audio devices, he designed computers. He was one of the early engineers in network engineering, and he designed computers for a company called DCA, which was the 5th largest computer manufacturer in the world. And he's worked on software for Apple and software for Windows. He's really versed in all this. And he was really curious about all these debates as well. And so he ran a test. I forgot the details of how he ran the test, but he copied 100 discs with iTunes or 120 discs with iTunes and was able to do a comparison to see if they were bit perfect or not. And 100% of the discs were bit perfect. So those claims that those companies make are probably true, but why would I pay for something that's free? Yeah, so I saw Chip had a hand up.
I just need you to repeat the question. I didn't hear the question.
The question was whether or not you're better off buying some of these third-party rippers or not. And they're probably great, and they probably meet all the claims that they make, but I'm cheap. So if there's something that's perfect and it's free, I'm going to take that every time. Any other questions before?
I don't know if you touched on this, but do you have a preference for sound-wise between AIFF and WAVE?
They sound virtually identical, but the issue is I can't back up my WAV files.
There's no metadata on WAVE.
Yeah, there's no way to, there's no tagging, there's no hooking to take. Yeah, but to me they seem to sound the same. I haven't noticed any difference. The only difference between AIF and WAVE is one starts with the least significant bit, and one starts with the most significant bit. They're just oriented in opposite directions, but other than that they're basically identical.
I was curious if iTunes has a bit rate limit. In other words, how high
32,384. Yeah. iTunes can do 32-bit 384. So what's Apple doing with all that music they're sitting on? You know, I'm going to hit pause for a second. Do you guys know that Apple hasn't accepted anything less than 2448 in 5 years? They're sitting on a huge library of music at 2448, 2496. So I'm kind of curious to see what they're going to do with that. They're tight-lipped. Apple is not a company to gossip about what they will and won't do, but it is an interesting footnote. So okay, we've got our encoder set properly. We've set.
You mentioned FireWire. The transfer rates on FireWire versus USB?
Well, USB 3.0 is faster. I think FireWire 800 is still faster than USB 2.0. But for me, it's more of the segregation of buses. But the absolute best connection I've heard for a hard drive, and you can actually hear differences between these different buses, Thunderbolt just smokes everything. It's insane how good Thunderbolt sounds.
What's your new computer? Which Apple?
This is a Retina. This is the new Apple Retina.
What, MacBook Pro?
MacBook Pro, yeah. Okay, so what we've done now is we've established how we're going to encode our disks and make sure that we encode them bit perfectly. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to select where we're going to store our music. So we can select where we're physically going to put the music. So here I have all the music selected to my external media drive. You actually have to tell iTunes where you want to store the music. The default would be to copy all of your music into your computer. And so if you're copying 1411 kilobyte disks, you're going to fill up your internal hard drive real quickly. So before you start copying disks, you have to establish a path where those files are going to go and where those files are going to be retrieved from. So you simply go into the advanced settings. I'll show you one more time here. All the way over here under advanced where it looks like a gear, I click to change, and then I can see the different hard drives. There's my MacBook Pro, there's my Windows, and there's my external media drive. And so I just select my external media drive, and I'm off and running. And that's about, and then I like to keep my media organized, and then I like to copy everything into a single folder. So those are just personal preferences. That's all you need to do to set up iTunes to make it work, just to make the fundamental construct of iTunes run properly.
Once you set those, they stay set unless you change them?
They do stay set, but here's something you got to be aware of. If I were to disconnect my external hard drive and then launch iTunes, iTunes is going to automatically default. It has to default to a hard drive, so it'll default back to the internal hard drive. So you got to be careful when you got to make sure everything's connected, and it's minor housekeeping when that happens. It's not that big of a deal. Yeah, it's easy to do that.
You may cover this later. I've had a situation where I've had, that my music off of the drive, backed up on another drive. The original drive goes belly up, and try to point iTunes over to the backup, and it just loses its mind. And the last time that happened, I had about 11,000 songs. I'm up over 30,000 now. So it
doubled your songs.
It either doubles or it misses. There's big. I'll get an album that's got 12 songs on it, 3 come across. Unless I sit there and hit play, then it finds, if you play a song.
Here's what I would do. You could select all. So I just, So I'd hit Command A. I'd select all. I would hit delete, and then I would delete the files, and then it will ask me if I want to keep those files and move them into the trash.
Right.
Let me hit pause. Let me start again. I would disconnect all hard drives. If anybody didn't hear that, raise your hand. Disconnect all your hard drives. Then select all, then hit delete, and just clear the metadata cache. Just clear it, okay? 60 minutes? Thanks. So clear the metadata, and then I would just repopulate the new hard drive and start from scratch and just let it rebuild. That's all. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to have to start going pretty quick here now, unfortunately. Now, who here is using iTunes? Who here is using something like Pure Music, Amara, Audiovana, any of those devices?
I used to.
What do you use now?
JRiver for Mac only.
Okay, awesome. So iTunes is a pretty convoluted, complex series of programs. I forgot how many programs it is in total, but it's quite a few. And if you look at the size of the iTunes applications, it's gargantuan. And it does have a couple of problems. For whatever reason, because of the amount of resources that it requires, it kind of brings down the sound of your computer. It's a little dull sounding, iTunes. It's bit perfect, but for whatever reason, it's a little bit dull sounding. So there's been this whole cottage industry of companies out there. Pure Music, AudioVana, Amara. All of these are plugins. And what they do is they sit behind the graphic user interface. So, for example, if I were to close down iTunes now, and I were to launch, say, Pure Music will bounce, and it will open up iTunes for me, and now I see Pure Music running in the background. So Pure Music is actually now the music player. It's a much smaller, much quicker, much more dynamic sounding music player. It appears as if I'm in iTunes, but I'm actually not in iTunes. I've just hijacked the graphic user interface. I've hijacked the control point. And all of these programs sound absolutely phenomenal. I'm not going to pick a winner. I'll let you pick the winner. Pure Music, AudioVana, like Nirvana, but AudioVana. Pure Music, AudioVana, Amara. These are all very good. There's another great one called Decibel, which is fantastic. All of them are great.
Except that every one of them has glitches when you use them with iTunes. You get crashes, you get skips.
I don't necessarily have that. I think a lot of times it can be user experience, and there's a lot of these things have a lot of different setup features, and you have to go through the menus and make sure that you have it set up properly. But I don't necessarily run into those problems. And from time to time there'll be an update. Like we just went to iTunes 11.1.3, and everyone had problems for the last 10 days. And it seems like everybody, Pure Music, Amara, AudioVana, all of them have released updates to fix the integration between the graphic user interface and that back-end engine. So they all offer 30-day trials. You can try any one of those things and see what you think, and pick the one that you like if you decide to go that way. Now, I'm running out of time. I'm really sorry. I talked too slow. I want to jump over to Windows, and I want to show you guys J-River real quickly. Alright, so while my Windows computer's booting up, you guys want to hear a really funny joke? Okay, so there's a snail, and he's walking down a street. The snail's walking down the street, and then like these two turtles jump out of the bush, and they beat the crap out of the snail. Like bam, bam, throw him all over the place, and then take off. The cops come, and the cops ask the snail what happened, and the snail says, I don't know, it all happened so quickly. This was from my awesome wife. This was a Christmas present, which yeah, it's really cool. I don't know where she found it. Yeah, it's a turntable. The digital guy has a turntable now. I actually have a turntable at home. Okay, so with J-River, there's some really cool things we can do in here. Is anyone doing DLNA or network media? Does anybody know what DLNA is? Has anybody tried it and got fed up with it? Okay, the short of it is, we don't have time to go through this, but the short of it is, the only program that I've found that's 100% reliable with 100% of the DLNA devices, regardless of the manufacturer, is J-River. J-River has figured out some really clever solutions for DLNA. Let me start with the DAC first, the locally connected DAC. So right now, if you can see, I've got Dragonfly highlighted, and with Dragonfly highlighted, I can go in here and I go into my options, and I can set that up. So I can select my output mode setting. With most asynchronous USB DACs, the Wasabi mode sounds the best. You would select that. And then what I can do is, they call it output mode settings, but they really should call it output mode settings. Select your device. So in here I can select the device that I want to play to, and it shows all the different devices that J-River could potentially play to. So I just select the Dragonfly, and I also have it set here for open device and exclusive access. So I kind of jumped a step. Back here in Windows, in the control panel, I can go into sounds and devices. Where's that? Hardware and sound. I go into sound, and I've got my Dragonfly selected. And then in properties, in advanced, I have this allow applications to take exclusive control of this device, give exclusive control give exclusive mode applications priority. So this creates a more direct, uninhibited, less interference path between the music player and the DAC. Now the other thing I can do here, there's a million little things you can do in here. I'm not going to get into that. The other thing you can do here, save those changes, I can add another dragonfly if I wanted to. If I get my right click to work, there we go, add zone. So now you see another zone popped up, and I could just title that dragonfly. Now when I title that dragonfly, I have to have a second dragonfly plugged into the computer. But then I can go in and I can set the preferences for that DAC separate from the other DAC. So if you wanted to do, maybe you have, anybody got outdoor speakers? Nobody here has outdoor speakers? Does anybody listen to music here? Oh, God forbid. Does anybody here drink beer? Okay, I have a pair of outdoor PSB speakers, and what I did was I set up a second zone. I added another dragonfly, and that plays to an NAD integrated and goes to the speakers, and I can control it from my iPad. I can control it from my Android device. So it makes it really easy. My wife can be in the house doing whatever she's doing. I could be out in the backyard working on my bicycle, drinking beer, and listening to a different song. So this is a really unique feature that you can't get in iTunes. It's a really powerful feature, and this feature exists on both the Mac and on the Windows side. Now the other thing,
it will play through both DACs simultaneously
at different rates, at different songs. Absolutely, yeah. They're so cool. Now I'm going to jump back in here.
So you could have a separate, like, double DSD DAC and a PCM DAC, and it'll be running both of them.
I believe so. I haven't played with DSD, so I don't know if there's any hang-ups. And you've got also how powerful is your computer and how much resources required for double DSD and all this other stuff. But the short of it is, in the normal world where you listen to PCM, I'm teasing you. I haven't had any problems. I've been playing 192 songs in the house and playing 1644 out in the backyard, and there haven't been any problems. And I've actually played 192 in the house and 192 outside, and there's been no hang-ups, so it's been very, very reliable. Now, I've just opened up the options again, and I've selected Media Network. And how much time do I have? 5 minutes? Okay, perfect. There's a feature in here called Add or Configure DLNA Device, and so I've configured this device. The big challenge that I found with DLNA is that all of these DLNA devices, they're called renderers, they're all Linux computers. And that's not the fundamental problem. The problem is that the people designing a lot of the boards in these devices, they haven't thought of every codec and every iteration of a codec. And so you get a lot of hang-ups and crashes. So for example, a year ago, this Pioneer piece couldn't play AIFF files that were greater than 2496. It would just crash. Just didn't understand an AIF file. But I could set it a FLAC file at 24192 or a WAV file, right? So it has semantical issues, right? So what JRiver did is really clever. You can create a direct server path for each DLNA device in your house, whether it be a TV or it be an audio device. And then what you can do is you can actually just convert all the file formats in the program itself. So if you had APE, or Vorbis, or WAV, or FLAC, or AIFF, or AAC, or there's one called Monkey's Uncle. There's over 30 audio file formats out there. And also sometimes you find there's slight iterations of them that confuse systems. With JRiver, what you can do is you can actually just tell JRiver, convert everything to linear PCM on the way out. So the two things that a DLNA device has to be able to decode, linear PCM and MP3. Those are the only things that DLNA requires that they do properly. So just take advantage of the linear PCM. So if you want to do connected media in the house, it's a great way to do it. You would just create a new path for that device, and you would go in and you would say under the mode, specified output mode format, and then you can select any of these, linear 16, linear 24, with no headers, with headers. You can convert them down to MP3 if you wanted to. But you can do anything you want is the point. And you can take a lot of the guesswork out of it. The other thing that's nice about this is you can control this from a web browser. So I can literally launch JRiver in a web browser. So I could be on my tablet, I could be on my iPad or my iPhone or my Android, and I could be anywhere in the house, and I can see all the devices. So you see I have Dragonfly 1 and Dragonfly, or Player 3, I haven't titled that zone yet. So I could click on Dragonfly right here, and let's pretend I'm on my iPad, and I could select the audio, I can select an artist, and I can just hit play. And now it's playing. So I didn't actually select that song in the J-River player. I selected it from a web browser. So I could be anywhere in my home, anywhere within earshot of my router, and I can control the system. So really, really powerful. It's really, I think, currently, it's the best program in totality. You can do movies, it can do television, it can do music. It's bit perfect. It sounds phenomenal. It does DSD to the gazills, whatever, you know. I don't even know it's going so fast over there. It's a very, very dynamic program, and it's about $49. But iTunes is also spectacular. If all you have is a single room with a single stereo system and you're an Apple user, iTunes with Pure Music or Amara or Audiovana sounds absolutely spectacular too. It's all a question of how far do you want to go? How much stuff, how much media do you want to move around the house? So that's the basics. That's all I got. I got 3 minutes, and then it's all yours. If anybody has any questions before I move on.
Yeah, how about the J remote for iPad? It looks like maybe this is better just using the web browser.
I prefer it, and it's free. It goes back to that whole free thing again.
So it does everything that J remote does?
More or less. It's just a different look.
Isn't it called Gizmo?
It's called Gizmo. Yeah, it's called Gizmo, and it's built in, and they have a great wiki. Instead of an owner's manual, J-River has a wiki, and it gives you a great explanation on how to use everything. Any other questions before I turn it over?
The maximum resolution, you said what it was for iTunes. What is it for J-River?
J-River does DSD.
Double DSD.
Double DSD, so 2.8 megahertz times 2.
Does the J-River also have briefing software?
It does, and it's bit perfect. Yeah, and it works very similarly to how iTunes works, where when it finds an error, it won't move on until it's read that error twice, exactly the same way. Then it knows that it's got a right copy. So, if anybody has any other questions, things may come up to you over the next couple of days, or you may be at home and you may be lost on your computer. You can email me at info@theworldscutestbaby.com. No, you can email me at info@audioquest.com. And my name's Steve Silberman. And if you just put in the subject Newport show for Steve Silberman, the emails will get forwarded to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
One other comment, just for people that want a really inexpensive USB DAC, your Dragonfly is the greatest buy in the business.
I appreciate that, and I didn't want to turn this into a self-promoting event.
I did it for you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, AudioQuest does. That would have to be my choice. AudioQuest has made cables for the last 30-odd years, and the last year we got into the hardware business, and we do offer a DAC. It sells for $250, and it goes up to $24.96. It plays all PCM formats, and it's for the money. It's a great little product, and I'm sure a lot of you already have great products at home. But if you're curious, we have it playing upstairs in room 10004. And the product was designed by Gordon Rankin, who was the first person to develop the asynchronous USB code. And just to back up Gordon, I'm a huge fan of Gordon's. Gordon was on the steering committee of USB back in the 90s. He was the person that really pushed the USB organization to add all of the audio formats to USB. We would not have adaptive USB. We would not have asynchronous USB if it weren't for Gordon and his terrier-like tenacity. So he's an absolutely phenomenal guy, and AudioQuest is really fortunate to have him as our lead designer now on our hardware projects. So I'm going to turn this over now to Marcel. He's going to talk a lot about file formats. We're not going to talk out of turn.
I don't need a mic.
Yeah, I could do it because I think it's getting recorded.
So, good morning, everybody. It's still morning, I think. Appreciate the great turnout. Appreciate everything that Steve said. I pretty much agree fundamentally with everything he said. It's astounding, actually, some of the things that we both kind of stumbled on as far as AIFF being better for playback use. A WAV file is better for recording because you don't have that extra data, so you're dealing with a lot higher track counts. So I do come from the recording world, so everything that, a lot of what I'm telling you is skewed slightly from that perspective. The good news is, 90% of what you listen to, that's where my world is. And I say 90% because there's always that 10% of the smaller independent labels that I don't get to meet with. However, all the guys at Universal Mastering, certainly Doug Sachs, Gateway Mastering guys, Bob Ludwig, Bernie Grunman, these people are people I have on speed dial on the phone. These are the guys that I deal with, you know, week to week. Jimmy Douglas, Michael Brower. I've been to all of their studios and consulted one way or another, and sometimes on an ongoing basis. Sometimes I'll get just random calls. So, but again, it's their perspective in encoding and recording. But there is a lot of overlap, certainly from the audiophile side. You know, in a mastering situation, it's all about accuracy of sound. You know, we need that playback to be, you know, precise at that playback stage. But, you know, that's what we call the monitoring DAC. Now, the transfer DAC is maybe more, I think both, you know, accuracy and beauty are both important from a listening perspective, right? We want to hear exactly what's going on, but we don't want to hear the cold hard truth sometimes. So, you know, audiophiles can dance between, from my, you know, vantage point, working together with doing shows for the last 3 years, and talking to a lot of you, you'll vacillate between, well, I want it to sound beautiful, but I want to hear what's going on. I want to hear the dimension, but I don't want to hear the harshness of, you know, of the top end sometimes, or you know, I want to hear the beauty or a little bit better low end, maybe, but sometimes I also want the punch and the accuracy and the dynamics of the low end. So we you know, and it can change from music to music. Are any of you like one DAC on one bit of music and one DAC on another bit of music? You ever find one DAC, one size fits all? You have found that to be the case. I mean, I've seen that. You know, we'll play this for jazz, we'll play this for rock, and that again, it becomes because converting is and audios can be very subjective. All right, who prefers analog? And we see that all of you are involved in digital pretty much in some way. Or is anyone here that's still analog only? So we've got some analog only. Who of you still prefers analog most of the time to digital? You're the guys I agree with. I mean, you know, in most cases, I just think digital audio, it does some things better. You know, the noise can be lower. But from an overall vantage point, I still prefer analog. But I'm a little bit spoiled because I've heard John Coltrane master tapes, you know, in the mastering room. And I've been exposed to some amazing sounding analog, and I know what we're up against. And digital audio, for the most part, just doesn't hold up. It just stinks. So that's the mountain we're trying to. That's the mountain we're trying to climb.
I concur.
That's the mountain we're trying to climb. That's the gorilla we're fighting. And you know, and I'm old enough, probably a little older than most people think. I'm almost 50, so I'm a little older. And I got a little 2-year-old at home, so I'm an old papa. And also a very proud father. But I'm old enough to remember a lot of vinyl. I'm old enough to remember, you know, great 3-way JBL speakers. I'm old enough to remember, you know, reel-to-reel. I got into recording when I was still working with reel-to-reel tape, and somewhere things all went awry. And I listened to, you know, some recordings from, you know, 1960, and I mean, Girl from Ipanema, and I'm like, why does this sound so much better? Okay, there's some tape noise. It just sounds so much more solid. It has more depth. There's more richness. What's going on? And I asked an audio person one time, where did we go wrong? And their answer was very quick and very terse. It was multi-channel recording. Multi-channel recording, because of crosstalk and because of the limitations of trying to cram all of those channels onto a small tape head, just sent us on a journey that we've been trying to kind of fix and make that work. And in some cases, you can trick it and you can make it sound really good. And, you know, you overwhelm it with great miking, and great engineering, and great EQing. But if you got a great 2-channel recording, I mean, you know, I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this and desire to hear great 2-channel. Give me a great 2-channel recording of a live performance, and it's just different. It sounds more real. It sounds like you're there, right? So that's another mountain that we're trying to climb. Now, what do we have inside of a computer? Well, you've got all kinds of noise and interference. So now we've got, multi-channel recording. We've got problems with digital. We got a lot of things to solve. And so another person who sort of recognized a lot of this very early is the man that I've worked with for the past 8 years. That's Igor Levik. And I firmly believe, from my vantage point in audio, one of these days he's going to be on the Mount Rushmore of audio scientists and innovators. And it's happening. It's happening real time. It's a very exciting time. It is impossible for me to not sound a little bit like a commercial because it's, from my vantage point, working with all these mastering engineers on the encoding side, clocking is that important to doing digital. I hesitate to say right, but to do it very well, because there's a number of things that affect audio. So let's get into some of that right now. I've given you a little perspective of where my mind is. So we make DACs and clocks. You can't make a DAC without a clock. What Igor recognized very early on is that, to do clocking well, you need a good chip. You need digital circuitry. You need to do things like discrete design, where you have a digital circuit board and an analog circuit board, and you power them separately. So you keep them separate because noise from one can affect performance of the other. So you can do all of that, and then you need great power supply. And then you need, nice analog circuitry coming out that amplifies that signal line level or de-amplifies for recording, right? But the other component, the forgotten rail in many, many systems, is clocking. And some people do it good. Some people pretty much can do it pretty well, and some people do it horrible. And this seems to be the #1 decider. I mean, we have the chips are the chips. We get the chips. We all have to buy the same, pretty much, chips. Very few people making custom chips, and the high-performance chips have to be made in an industrial sort of manner that costs a lot of money. And so we all have to select from, Sabre or T.H.E, or we have to form these alliances in the chip part of the decision making. But what we can control is the clocking. We can make a very stable clock, which we've done, and then we can take that clock and apply a little bit of randomness to it. And we call that jitter management. And this is the secret to Antelope, and other people do their own forms of jitter management. Because of limited time, we have to try and push the questions to the end. What is a clock? Very good question. And we're going to get there. So, again, I've told you pretty much the history of Antelope. We have a number of products, and I'm going to get to where clocking is important here in a second. But we started doing clocks early on, and we started, around 2007, 2008, the audiophile community started to catch up and say, hey, can we clock this, can we clock that? And we looked at the DACs on the market, and very few of them had a word clock input on them. So the only way to clock a DAC was on the digital, very beginning of the digital source. So we decided just lost the battery or something. Sorry. So we lost battery. Is it working?
It's still working.
Yeah.
No, I think the other mic's working. Yeah, you're hearing the tabletop. So being an audio guy will dance. Okay, we have audio again. A little bit different quality. See how much analog circuitry can change the sound? Well, we have top end now. So, and I'm breaking the sign, but... Okay, so we started getting calls from audiophile communities saying, hey, how can we use our clocks? And we looked at the marketplace and we said, most of you can't. So we introduced the Zodiac, which has a built-in digital de-jitter digital out. So you could use the Zodiac as a, feed it digital, de-jitter it, send it out to your DAC. But it's also a world-class D-to-A converter on its own that's been very well reviewed. Like I said, it's hard to tell the clock story without telling the Antelope story, so forgive me for sounding a little like a commercial, but that's sort of the reality we're living in. So we also introduced, going back for a step, if you look at the isochrone 10M on the right side, that is a very important, significant part of trying to make digital sound more analog. because you have to start from an ultra-stable clocking point. Now, and again, I'm going to explain a little bit better what clocking is in 1 second in an upcoming slide. But let's assume that timing reference is very important to digital audio. So the 10M, this Rudy Van Gelder, John Coltrane session I talk about, it was a defining moment for us at Antelope. Now we had to overcome a lot of white papers about how an internal clock on your converter always sounds better than an external clock, which is just blatantly untrue. And that's why all of these mastering guys, including DTS, endorse and use our clocking in their testing environment. And again, 90% of the music you listen to has all been clocked by Antelope because sheer fact of the matter that we have all of these mastering engineers using. And when we brought that 10M over to these top engineers, they all went bananas. And what we heard at Universal Mastering was the tapes playing live, being converted, and every single time with world-class converters costing in excess of $10,000. Meitners at this demo. Great sounding converters, but they always sounded two-dimensional. Every single time they put it back and you could hear the depth of field. We have 2 ears, we have 2 speakers, and we're able to locate three-dimensional sort of sound or depth of field. That's audio localization, which is something it's offline topic, but that's how we can hear depth, and that's how we can perceive depth from even a stereo sounding source. But if you're an analog, you hear that, wow, it just has more depth, things just sound deeper. How is that? Well, that's analog. The digital medium has never done that well until the 10M came. And this is not just coming from me, this is coming from all of these top engineers. We have 30 to go, or we're 30 in? Okay, so we're still okay. What we heard was maybe not a precise representation because there's still other factors to work out, but man, was it so much closer that Universal bought all of the clocking for all their studios and had me come in and meet with all of their A&R people, not just in LA, but in New York at the time. And so I felt like the president, doing the 15-minute rotations, and everyone's coming in, meeting ready. Here's Marcel, this is Antelope. Here, listen to the tape. Here, listen to the converted copy. They were so close, oohs and ahs, and the rest is history. They were even putting stickers on their Digipack masters that said atomically clocked from Antelope. Again, forget the Antelope story for a second and just focus on the technology and how amazing that is, and how incredible it is to be able to very closely duplicate an analog source with digital. So what is digital? So I might have to skip back to this slide a little bit to explain something. I pretty much, I've told you the places that are using our clocks. The Hollywood Avatar, extensively used with external Antelope clocking. In fact, every major motion picture score the past 3 to 4 years has been clocked by Antelope. And this is because these guys like Sean Murphy, Alan Meyerson, Hans Zimmer tested with and without, and they all felt that the sound was closer to the source, closer to real, closer to analog, more depth of field, better localization. On Avatar, Sean Murphy came to me at AES and said, it's one thing for my engineers to say something about the sound, but when the editors can pick which cue was recorded with and without clocking, there's something going on. So, in 1982, the first CD player was introduced by Sony at the Japanese Audio Fair. DACs in these devices incorporated a technique called oversampling, which together with noise averaging, shift the noise from the conversion process outside of the audio spectrum. So oversampling, what I'm trying to, again, we're supposed to be demystifying digital audio today. Oversampling is sampling the same bits of audio over and over and over, as Steve well described a few minutes ago. What's interesting about this history a little bit is that Sony wanted to do 16-bit because Philips already had a 14-bit CD player ready to get to ship, and it was Sony Philips that introduced the CD player initially. So Sony sort of used their leverage and said, yeah, we'll do this, we'll get together, we'll team up with you on this new medium, this new platform, but we want it to be 16-bit. And they ended up introducing the CD player first, just before Philips could do the 16-bit. But with oversampling, the reality was if you oversampled enough, the playing field between 14 and 16-bit was level. And think about that for a minute. We're talking about 20-bit, 24-bit. That's how important, at least in mathematics, oversampling can be. But getting back to the clock story for 1 second, the more you oversample, the more important it becomes that timing reference is correct. So the data was stored on CDs using a method called pulse code modulation. And the audio quality of pulse code modulation is determined by the sampling frequency, 44.1, 96K. Now, we can have a debate, 96, 192, we're getting into splitting hairs. I would argue, once again, that the clocking is more important than the sampling rate to pristine audio. However, you do still hear, as you go up in sampling frequencies, improvements in depth of field, air, if you will. But you can get amazing performance from even 44.1 16-bit when the system is designed properly and when you're clocking the system properly. And what is a clock? The clock controls the timing reference of that sampling frequency. So if you're at 44.1, 96K, did we lose the guy who asked what a clock was? He gave up? I think he gave up. It's a debatable topic, but from my vantage point, it isn't. It's a debated topic. I don't feel it's debatable at all, but it's a debated topic. So the bit depth, again, we can talk about 1 bit. How do you overcome 1 bit, 16 bits? Everyone knows what a bit is, right? We have a 1-bit word. How much information is stored, on off for that first sample. So the 1-bit audio just oversamples many times. 64, we talk about double DSD or double DSD. Double DSD works better because it oversamples. We'll get to that in a second. So computer or servers today are usually where digital audio files are stored and distributed. However, rapidly more and more audio files are stored on mobile phones, pad devices. We're talking about DLNA, very timely. Clouds are used in order to reduce the amount of storage, and other devices allow for bulk storage. Solid-state flash technology has outperformed conventional drives and CD transports. Now keep in mind, the life expectancy, and I deal with this in the studio world because they're running these drives very hard, is around 18 months for a solid-state drive. So when we talk about copying your files, it's very important to back up your collections and not put them all on one drive. Solid-state technology does not work as well as standard hard drives.
What's that?
Solid-state life expectancy is about 18 months.
I haven't had that problem. I think it comes down to quality. I think that's a pretty.
It's read-write cycles. In a couple of years, you'll start to have problems.
We have studios that are heavily using these things. In a few months, they're dying on a consistent basis. So we can talk more about that offline. But be aware, be advised, and be careful. Be safe out. Be safe out there.
Back it up on a rotary disc.
Back it up. Back it up. Back it up. Back it up on a standard disk. So power supply, DAC chips, and analog circuitry are also factors that impact the performance of sound. And I don't want to state any of this lightly. These are all extremely important, I would argue, to the sound. Now, again, a little bit of subjectivity, but this is from my experience and a little and some, I'm certain some science behind it. Larger size DACs often do sound better, often. And not that you can't make a great small DAC, you absolutely can, but where can you put the power supply and where can you put the large capacitors and how do you do that? And that's why, hey, we're audiophiles here, right? We want the convenience of a small DAC and we want the elegance of a larger DAC. They do have more room to house higher grade components, capacitors, and also relays, very important. And also allow for better heat management is higher grade DAC chips. Higher grade DAC chips get warmer. So the higher performing DAC chip, the more heat. And we found this out when we built a 32-channel in and out USB device, which we have for the Pro World, which was on a slide I kind of skipped past a minute. We have custom USB technology in our device that reclocks and also uses the entire 480 megabits per second throughput. And there's also packet amounts transfers. You get more on the PCs, by the way. You get more packet transfers per message signal on a PC than you do a Mac, and that's something that we've red flagged for Apple. They weren't aware that it wasn't working because we made the first device that was able to use all the bandwidth on USB. And so we're actually consulting with Apple's team to try to get that updated in a future OS update. Another advantage to larger enclosure that allows for discrete design of digital and analog circuit boards, which I alluded to earlier, where we keep the noise from digital and analog separate on 2 different circuits. And a lot of people employ that technology. There's no secret there. So let's jump up to DSD for a second. 1999, Sony Philips introduced the first SACD, which incorporated DSD direct stream digital. And this is pulse, not, we talked about pulse cold modulation. This is pulse density modulation, again, from that referring to that oversampling method. DSD uses 1-bit stream to store data 64 times oversampling at, again, 2.8 megahertz. Steve mentioned earlier, and this allows for an extended frequency responsible up to 100 kilohertz. However, because of the filtering, the noise that gets triggered at 100K, you've heard about noise shaping and noise filtering. Because of this noise, you're theoretically only going up to 80 or 90 kilohertz. Now, our hearing doesn't go up that high, but there are debates about how interfrequency modulation, how sound modulation affects, having that extra bandwidth affects the overall sound quality. I've heard some very good sounding DSD. I've heard some amazing sounding PCM. PCM double DSD refers to 128 times oversampling, and we're actually incorporating quad DSD. Now, why do you double? Why do you quad? Well, it turns out that when you double those sampling rates, and again, clock them properly, you can push that noise further off the spectrum and you don't have to do as much filtering. We're also employing in our new DACs a special an option for you to select the noise shaping filtering that you desire. Now, this is a real time, and we had a little, I overheard a little discussion David was having about this topic. Audio measurements and listening tests have shown the audio quality of DSD is comparable to 96K 24-bit PCM. Now, individual results may vary, and it's going to depend on the quality of, again, your clocking. PCM can sound amazing. All the audio that you're working with, I would say not all, but 99.9% of the audio being recorded is PCM. So it's going through that stage at one point or another, so you're converting it to DSD when you're playing it back. It's not actually playing at the actual rate it was recorded, and you're not hearing exactly what the musicians heard when they made those decisions, unless you're playing it in what we call the native file format.
I want to interrupt you there. When you're producing stuff and you need to mix tracks, don't you have to convert to PCM and mix them back to DSD?
If you record DSD, all the mixing, that's correct, James, all of the mixing software operates it, except for PeerMix, which can do some DSD, but not as much control over over the audio in that format, because there's a lot more plugins and there's a lot more. Listen, Pro Tools, like it or love it, and I live in that world all the time, as a software program that, it's like iTunes, it's ubiquitous. You can't get away from it because it's just so powerful for post-production and production world. And that is all PCM. Matter of fact, Pro Tools tops off at 192, sadly. We're trying to get them to go to 384. The vast majority of Sigma Delta converted chips are not compatible or not capable of processing audio fully at 1 bit. So even within the chip, in nearly all modern DSD systems, there's a lot of talk about the Sabre chip. That chip modulates the PCM within its architecture, by definition. So DXD is a PCM encoding scheme that allows high resolution editing at 352.8. So if you're recording DXD, you're not DSD, okay? DXD is high resolution PCM. They came up with the format in order to more easily edit and convert DSD so that you could use it a little more in a comparable sort of resolution. But it's not, DXD is not DSD. I should also offer that, you know, for this reason, we delayed release of DSD in our own products because we did not want to choose a chip that went to PCM. We were using a relatively recent 792A chip from T.H.E that does remain DSD throughout its architecture, according to their published math. Wow. Let's say that. So, so which DAC do you buy? You know, first you have to decide really, you know, and this could be as easily as a decision as also what PC do you buy. You know, there are some great sounding DACs out there. I mean, I actually really like the Meitner stuff. I really like, you know, some of the Digital Audio Denmark is really great. DCS has some great sounding stuff. You know, these are very, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say Antelope's the only place making great, you know, converters. I just heard our new Rubicon 2 days ago, and I'd love for you guys to come up to 402 and have a listen. It's pretty stunning, and it's the closest thing to that big sounding tape, you know, experience that I was talking about that I've heard so far. But there's a rubidium oscillator built into the actual DAC, which is kind of cool. So again, which DAC? Well, you kind of have to decide, you know, what format. And then you have to kind of work your way from there. I thought Steve did a great job explaining the formats that are available. And again, you know, I'm kind of kidding around. I pretty much agree with everything Steve said. I thought he did a great job there. So SPDIF, AES, optical, most CD players, media players, computer sound cards have some type of digital connectivity. So you need to make those decisions. A lot of you already have DACs, so I'm skimming over this just a touch. But you need to take a look at what you want to do. If you want to do DLNA, then you have to make decisions about what, you know, that's going to affect your player choice, as Steve mentioned. You know, you need to decide what connectivity, what formats you want to play. Because then, you know, when you start compiling, you don't want, if you can avoid mixed matching, you're going to get better results. You know, you want to find what plays best, and you want to, you know, get on some, you do need to self-educate today, because there's so many people with so many opinions, so you need to kind of, you know, yes, get a consultant, yes, come to these seminars, that's very important, but go out there and self-educate and make choices that kind of tailor to yourself. It's easier than ever to get answers.
What are the best websites to follow for digital sound?
Some of the best websites to follow, I mean, you know, Computer Audiophile is great.
I would say Computer Audiophile, in terms of just learning how to do things, probably the gold standard here in the United States.
How about the Digital Asylum? Not as good?
I'm not.
I have no comment at this time. Yeah. Also, Audio Stream from Stereophile is very good too.
Audio Stream.
Yeah. And there's also one more. I'm sorry. There's a guy named Vincent Karrs, Karrs. He runs a site called The Well-Tempered Computer.
The Well-Tempered Computer.
And that's also just, it's resource based. It's not, they don't do product reviews. They just, very smart computer people.
You know, something else that Steve said that I really loved was talking about using the right file format or selecting the format when you're doing your transfers, bit accurate transfers. Talked about a little bit. This is something that that happens on the recording side. So if any of you do start deciding to archive your record collection or are already starting to do that, then now you're getting into my world. So we'll see how we play together, right? So you overlap into that recording engineer world. And one thing that I will say is I found extremely important is to record that file in the format that you're going to play it back in. And that sounds much easier than it is, because you have to go into some menus and select, for example, stereo interleaved, which is an option in Pro Tools. Otherwise, it records 2 mono files. And what tons of studios to this day, and even mastering engineers do, is they think, well, you know, I'm mastering double mono. Okay? Every analog device that a mastering engineer uses is 2 mono devices. So I should just record dual mono. And I had, you know, guys from, I'll just say it, Bernie Grumman told me, yeah, we only work with 2 files, 2 mono files. But that's not the file that you're delivering in. So what do you have to do? You have to do, that's what he was talking about earlier, is the DSP functions. Every time you have to process something in DSP, especially when you're done, you're changing what you're done with. So, you know, the idea is, and that's why they use this monitor DAC I talked about at the beginning, to monitor post A to D, to hear what everything's doing and how it's going to sound at the end of the game. That's it. When I made those decisions and I've monitored it and I've made whatever concessions I've made for the gear and the digital, I want to be done. And so by selecting things like stereo interleaved within Pro Tools, or making sure whatever recording software you're using is the final format, that means, 24-bit, you record at 24-bit, great. If you're going to record at 96, if that's what you want to play it back in, record it at 96. Because if you record it at...
You lose something, right?
You lose something in the conversion, sure. You lose something in the format conversion. You lose something when you export it. If you process audio digitally, you're losing something. Digital audio stinks, right? I mean, that's just the reality. So you want to avoid as much of it as you can. Minimalist, less is definitely more. And so you record an interleaved file, and then I go right into the folder of the DAW and just take that. And then you can use some software, you have to be careful again here, this is tricky, does destructive editing. It sounds terrible. It's actually good. Because with destructive editing you're going in and editing off a beginning or head and tail. So you need, say you started your record, you don't want to hear that, the needle noise at the beginning. So you want to go in there and edit that out. You want to look for a program, something Logic has a very good destructive sample editor. You want to go in and destructively edit just the beginning, and what that does is it just cuts off just the beginning and leaves the rest of the data alone. If you go into an application, edit the beginning and then export, you just messed up your audio some more. And we're talking about nuance, but hey, that's what we're here for, right? We're here to not destroy something that we like, something that we just recorded. So there are some steps there, and certainly, feel free to follow up. I'm also very easy to reach, info@antelopeaudio.com, so I also answer all the main Antelope questions and emails. So I tried to leave enough time, and we have almost 10 minutes or 8 minutes. Questions?
Is your company also sell products for home consumers, or?
Yeah, I skimmed through that. I didn't want to sound like a commercial. I knew I was going to sound like commercial enough. But we have a Zodiac line of two-channel D to A converters that start in price range from $2,000 to $5,000. You can get an optional external power supply. We sell that with a standard wall, kind of inline wall wart supply, and you can upgrade to the triple regulated linear power supply, which does make them sound even better. There are bundles available that on even the new Zodiac Platinum that we're shipping this fall, which has that DSD I talked about built in. That bundle is $5,500. Those come with remotes. Those come with stepped relay attenuators. Again, anything we can do to get out of the sound. So you're doing digitally controlled analog. So when you turn down, an analog attenuator, well, there are several advantages to stepped attenuators when they're done right, when they're designed correctly. But with a relay attenuator, and again, this gets to the size factor, relays you can turn down and control with a remote control, and you're not doing digital bit reduction. You're actually playing back the full bit rate of your final file at the lowest volume levels you turn your DAC down to. We also we're introducing a new Rubicon that we're showing up upstairs that I'm just hearing, and I really can't say enough about it. It's amazing sounding. It is $40,000, but it combines.
Mine's $250.
It runs the gamut, right? But now, what is included for that price, though, is a JFET transformer phono input stage that's fully controlled. You can use with moving coil, moving magnet. You can adjust the resistance, capacitance. World-class mastering quality A to D converter with our USB technology that de-jitters. So it's really a solution to copy your records at a mastering quality level and listen back to audio the way that it was performed. So that's the gamut, the range of products there.
No, get a quantity discount? No.
Yeah, somebody was asking me about surround sound, and we did build them so you could stack them.
No, the take-home message from your talk today seems to be about sort of like the clock key factor in quality of recording and playback of in digital sound. My question is, since all the you know, everybody's DAC and so forth has to be starting with commercially sourced stuff. Is this being acknowledged enough among the manufacturers of the chips for them to make more precision clocks that can be used for everyone? I mean, because right now your products.
Well, clocking isn't done at the chip. The chip does the modulation.
But the clocking, where's the clocking done on the recording side?
Every converter has a crystal clock.
Or a phase lock loop receiver.
Right, and inside the unit itself that can either accept and transmit clock or clock its own device. So CD players have a crystal clock built inside the unit. So the chip is just performing the calculations. It's not performing the timing reference.
The quality of the clock can vary wildly.
Absolutely, and that's a big problem. That's a big issue.
Would it be okay if I jumped in?
Oh, go, yeah.
There's a couple of ways. I'll address it from the playback side because I don't live in I don't live in both worlds. You can do it a couple of ways in a CD player or a consumer grade product. You can use what's called a phase lock loop receiver, which is a variable frequency clock. It can run at 44 or 48 or multiples of that. They tend to be lower in resolution. They tend to be less accurate because they are variable. They don't lock onto a specific frequency. Then what you can buy are what are called discrete clocks. So you'd buy one that is designed to run at 44.1 and the multiples of that. And you'd have another clock if your device was playing more than one sample rate. You'd have a clock that ran at 48, 96, 192. So the clock, the crystal needs to be really accurate, but not only does the crystal need to be really accurate, but there's a power supply that drives the clocks, and those need to be really, really accurate. So you want to have a very, very accurate clock with a really, really well-designed power supply. But then if you want to take it another step further, you want to have an individual power supply for each clock. Because if the two clocks are tied to the same power supply, when I'm using one clock, the other clock will go into what's called a piezo-synchronous mode, and it will start to oscillate even though you don't want to use it, and the two clocks are disharmonious. So you want to have two separate power supplies for the individual clocks. And then if you really want to take it another step further, you want to make sure you can not only turn on and off the individual power supplies for those clocks, but you want to make sure that you can lift the ground on the clock that's not being used so that there's no leakage between the two clocks over the ground. So clocks and clock implementation and clock design, it's a very, very critical part of the whole playback channel.
Now I'll jump in. Some of that may have was over my head. Okay. So, I'm not sure specifically about the necessity to have separate power supplies for different rate clocks. Is that what you mean? If you're running a clock at one rate, another clock at another rate?
If I had two clocks in my device, I had one.
Why would you have two clocks?
One fixed frequency clock for 44.1, 88.2, 176.4, etc. And I'd have another fixed frequency clock for 48, 96, 192. I would use, I would have it.
All clocks oscillate at much higher frequencies. Every clock is downsampled. So it's a function of the math from the downsampling. The resonant frequency is in the megahertz range of crystal.
I heard the difference if you got the two separate power supplies. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, but, yeah. Again, I don't understand the function for that because the crystals are resonating in the megahertz range.
Okay,
not
I heard the difference.
Everyone's perspective.
Yeah, everything. The other important thing about clocking that we do employ, I've got 1 minute left, I'll leave you with this last point about at least our approach to clocks. The reality is clocks drift. You can look up crystal drift. It's an element, a crystal resides in the physical world, it drifts, it ages, just like all of us. The way that we overcome some of the function or the effects of aging or crystal aging is we use an oven-controlled crystal oscillator. We heat the crystal to around 65 degrees Celsius to keep this stable at a steady temperature. And this may avoid some of the fluctuations in power, heat, humidity, environmental conditions that affect the stability and aging of the crystal. So that's you know, some of these things that may, a system that may need one set of circumstances on one hand to operate optimally, another system with other advantages may operate, you know, better in that circumstance. So not always a one-size-fits-all world. So thank you all for your time. I'll be in 402 if you have further questions. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you for coming.